to Transformation in Trials. Welcome to Transformation in Trials. This is a podcast exploring all things transformational in clinical trials. Nothing is off limits on the show, and we will have guests from the whole spectrum of the clinical trials community. And we're your hosts, Ivana and Sam. Well, today we have two guests with us for this episode. And the topic for today is access to drugs, especially for women. And I'll just say that these episodes are recorded by the people in the rooms and do not represent any opinions of any employers that any of us represent. I will ask both Ulla Lønberg and Helle Hartnack to introduce themselves, and then we'll get into the topic of the podcast.
Hi, Ivana. Hi, Sam. I'm Ulla Lønberg. I trained as a medical doctor, and I have been working in various medical affairs roles for about 17 years.
I'm Helle Hartnack. I am a registered nurse and have a clinical background before I joined the industry 25 years ago. I've been working in several roles, but primarily within clinical studies. And my main focus has been within chronic patients. So it's chronic diseases and patients that are living for a very long time with their disease and where it brings them, so to speak.
Very interesting background. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about this publication and some of the very interesting findings that were in that.
Sure. So together with leading clinicians, we conducted a real-world evidence study where we investigated whether there is equal access to so-called device-aided therapies for Parkinson's disease in Denmark. And when we talk about these device-aided therapies, we talk about a specific kind of brain stimulation that requires brain surgery, or the use of pumps to deliver medicine continuously. And these pumps can deliver medicine either through a tube inserted under the skin, such as a subcutaneous treatment, or through a tube into the intestine. And we also investigated certain characteristics pertaining to the patients who get these treatments. And what we found was that more men than women get device-aided therapies, and that is primarily driven by the fact that they get more brain surgery. And I found that when we discuss these findings with people, we tend to get the same kind of comment, either that men are risk takers or men are tech-oriented and women are not. But what we discussed in this publication also is that there's actually very little data to support this notion. There's very little data that examines how men and women make decisions on accepting a treatment, or whether their treating physician also has a bias, perhaps in the way they refer patients to a specific kind of treatment. And secondly, even if it is true that men are risk takers and women are not, should we just accept that and then that's that? Or should we try to understand women's concerns about this surgery or this treatment and find a way of addressing these concerns by communicating differently to women than to men? For instance, if women's underlying concern, it could be that they need to shave off some of their hair, or perhaps they have a carer responsibility for a partner at home, and they worry something would happen to them during surgery. That could probably be addressed by a different type of communication.
Yeah, and I can only add here that women often have kind of a project manager role in the family, not only the close family, but also the extended family. So they might have other considerations pushing in a direction that we will not see for men. So I think it's important that we think about women having a special role, typically, emotionally and practically, logistically. So they have to consider this when they do just the risk benefit and maybe also the burden of a given therapy.
That is, in fact, a very interesting finding, and also the role that women are assumed to play within a household or within an extended family. And were there any other aspects of how women may be treated differently or assumed to be acting differently in this study?
We can see an observation, but we can't point to any factors leading to that observation. We can't find the cause. So that is estimated guesswork, you could say. We did a lot of a literature review to try and understand this. We did find a few studies talking about how patients make decisions, but a lot of them are not gender specific or with sex disaggregated data. And also there was something that points to the fact that physicians could make decisions on behalf of the patients in terms of how they refer patients to these therapies. But again, usually very small studies. So what we can point to is a lack of data more than anything about why this is so.
I was going to ask a question about that, Ulla, in terms of the actual numbers. Can you give us a sense as to the numbers of patients in both the female and male groups for this particular study that you're referring to? Yes.
So we found that 59% of patients are male and 39% are female. And the patients who get device-aided therapies, that gap widens a bit to 63% male and 37% female. And that was statistically significant. But when we looked into these different kinds of therapies, we looked at brain surgery separately and one of the pump therapies separately. And there we found that 68% of men get the brain surgery and only 32% of women. So the difference in access to device-aided therapies was mostly driven by the brain surgery.
Wow. Yeah. Interesting.
We thought so. It was quite surprising. And one of the clinicians that I work with went straight back to her clinic to really look at the list of patients that are being referred to brain surgery, and she could find the same thing in her own lists. So she was really, let's say, awakened by it. Or I mean, it's always interesting when you have some data that makes you go, wow, I did not know this. So we have actually talked about this a lot with clinicians. But again, as I mentioned before, they tend to say the same things. They say, yeah, men are risk takers, they want this, and women are reluctant. And what we also discussed was accepting a treatment might also be very difficult for some of these patients, because Parkinson's disease is it's basically a brain disease, and it can affect the way that you make decisions, and it's sometimes easier to just not make a decision. And that means we could argue that not making a decision is actually also a decision. But that is even more difficult for patients who suffer from this disease. And I think that is one of the reasons why many of these patients, even if they fulfill the criteria for device-aided therapy, even if they are at the right stage in the disease for these therapies, they don't get them, or they refuse to accept them when they get the offer.
But if I understand your study correctly, that more men are accepting the offer for this treatment, right?
Yes.
So even though you've got that component that you just talked to a second ago about people not being maybe aware of all of the implications or able to actually make the right decision there, we still see this in this trend or situation where more men are getting the treatment versus women.
Yes, yeah, but maybe this is this could also be affected from the point where you do have some people, you could say men or women, but some people might need to really dig deeper into the risks and the burden on the long run, not only what is just right before them, but also taking the next years into considerations instead of just being in the now. I think that is also one of the things that we do maybe tend not to really tailor-made the information and the discussions around a certain topic in the same. We don't give them the possibility really to get the information that they might need to take the decision. And then it's easier not to take the decision, but just to say no.
But also what we did discuss is, or what the clinicians say, is that some men do demand the therapy. So, but you don't have very many Parkinson's patients who are very proactive and very demanding, but a few are. And those who are, they tend to be the men who want brain surgery. Again, I'm not a clinician. I'm just referring to some of the discussions we had in the study group.
No, I think it's fascinating. And I wonder, I don't know if the numbers would be high enough to look into this, but if you could look at individual physician trends to see if there were patterns or trends when you looked at the individual physician, to see whether that kind of potential bias was even prevalent at the individual physician level.
I think I just have to say that would be very difficult because, first of all, not a lot of patients get these treatments per year. But also, they could come from there are only 2 centers in Denmark that treat with deep brain stimulation. So in order for patients to be referred to these centers, they would need to go through either their private practicing neurologist or a movement disorder specialist clinic. So I think it would be very difficult with these small numbers to see an actual trend per prescriber or per referring physician. I think we need more data on this, and I think we need to talk about the larger trends here. Helle?
Yeah, because I think that this is not only around brain surgery or anything. I mean, it in general, I think that we need to have a more holistic approach when we look into this, and we need to understand better, or it could help us to understand better the mechanisms that leads to a decision. Whether it's the healthcare professional that might not be aware that they're sending signals around what they find the best possible treatment for this patient, and why they're thinking like that. So we need to dig further into that and have a holistic approach, because one size does not fit all. And I think that that we do have also unconscious bias here when we do see healthcare professionals suggesting or recommending a treatment for a given patient based on obviously what they find is correct. They might think that they know the patient. They might think that they have taken everything into consideration, but maybe they lack tools, or maybe they could have tools that could help them just checking up on parameters that could help them make sure that they are really aligned with the patient and the decision.
I think what they lack most is time.
Yeah.
So
But still having tools might maybe help also on the time perspective.
I'm seeing before me a kind of a bias buster tool for clinicians.
Yeah, it's a good tool.
But maybe for context for some of our listeners, can you maybe just set the stage for what kind of information would a patient usually receive about a drug like this?
I think it depends, of course, very much on the physician. Some of them try to introduce. Do you want to talk about the drugs they get before the device-aided therapies, or?
Usually when I was mostly curious about when they have to make the decision whether to jump aboard the device-aided therapy ship.
Yes. So you could argue that in the worst case, we all know that patients, they hear something differently from what the physicians are saying, right? So if a physician spends a lot of time explaining the pros and the cons of these various therapies, and I know for a fact they really try to emphasize the value that these therapies could bring to the patient, and even though it's often ultimately the patient's own decision to accept them. So I know these physicians are doing a tremendous work in order to explain on a good level how these therapies work, and also, of course, the risks, and emphasizing the value. But in the end, what the patient often hear is that they can choose between a hole in the head and a hole in the stomach. And I know the physicians are so frustrated by this, because they do really try and talk about, the value that these therapies can bring. But discussing brain surgery, or discussing having a tube permanently fixed to your body and a pump that you need to carry around, that is a big decision for many patients. And again, if you do the brain surgery, you need to have a kind of battery inserted under the skin, and if you do the pump, you need to have the pump and carry that around with you. Of course, you can disconnect it, but you still, in order to get the benefit of the medicine, you need to carry it on you at all times, or definitely during the day. So it is a big decision. We're not arguing against that at all.
Maybe there's influence in terms of how the options are communicated, right? Because the way that you use your words and the words that you choose in every context of life has a big bearing in terms of how they're interpreted. So I don't know if there's even options to standardize that delivery. Surely technology must have a part to play in that, to be able to really standardize a communication to a patient on the pros and cons of the various devices and the risks, etc.
The thing is, Sam, from my point of view, I think, of course, you can standardize, and I'm pretty sure that most healthcare professionals are very diligent with what they are actually saying. But the thing is that this is also what is happening between two people. It's the nonverbal communication. It's the things that you the silence in the room. It's everything else that is happening between these two patients when they're communicating. Studying of what is actually going on, and how to maybe nudge in a direction, or whether you should do or not do. So I think it's really integrity at the healthcare professional to make sure that they're really there, and they're together with the patient, and they're able to be in the room, and to really to meet the patient where they are. They're doing a lot, and they're really trying to, but we are all biased in a way. We are all we lived a life, and we do have experience that makes us feeling that we know things, which is also helping us. But I think still, even though you have an agenda where you say the same words, you will always have the nonverbal communication that might play the biggest role.
No, I totally agree, Helle. It's a really well said point, actually. And part of me wonders whether the physicians aren't aware of this. And the study that you've alluded to is the first part of making people aware, and then when they're aware, they can be a bit more, to your point, present when in the communication of the various different options, and that's a starting point at least.
It's easier said than done, I think, but sure. Because it's life as it is. I mean, it's but the more information we have, the more knowledge we have in this area, and the more we know about what influences the decisions will still help.
But are there any maybe studies conducted around the behavior of both patients and physicians in a setting like that? Or could there maybe be any studies conducted in this area?
We hope so.
Helle, we have discussed this a lot, that if there's one thing we would wish for our industry, it would definitely be to integrate behavioral analysis more in understanding how the medicines we develop reach the patient or do not reach the patient. There's so much exciting knowledge out there in the behavioral and the social sciences that could inform us both how physicians make decisions and how patients do.
I'm very excited about this, especially because I am a behavioral economist. So this is right up my alley. And I'm like, woo, I could potentially be useful for actual clinical studies. That would be awesome. But if we were to...
so interesting. Yeah.
If we were to create like a thought experiment, how could we go about studying something as complex as the interaction between a clinician and a patient?
We have made baby steps in terms of finding a company that specializes in these areas, because I don't think you can find the expertise within the industry classically, and not amongst clinicians either. So I imagine that we'd need to engage special companies that are experts in the behavioral space. But there should also be a desire from industry to understand these things, and not just from Helle and myself. But this is something that we try to argue for, because I think this kind of nuance is necessary in order to understand our patients and in order to truly be a patient-centric company that both our current employer is, and that all pharmaceutical companies, they strive to be. So I think that would be the next step. That would be to truly understand the patient journey, and also what I like to call the non-patient journey, to understand the fact, because when we talk about the patient journey, we talk about usually understanding how the patient at the right time in terms of their symptoms ends up at the right place where they can potentially get a product. And I think industry is very good at understanding that, and also about differentiating between products. But when the patient ends up not getting a product or getting a much inferior product, that is also really interesting. And I don't think we paid much attention to that. Definitely not until now. And so I think that is the next step in understanding the patient and being a patient-centric company.
That is a very interesting term you just mentioned there, Ulla, the non-patient journey.
Yes. So it's, I don't think you can find this in any dictionary, but it's something that I've been thinking about since doing this study, and understanding that access is different for various demographic groups, various populations. And as Helle talked about before, when we talk about these chronic conditions where the purpose is to alleviate symptoms and improving quality of life, then we need to think differently about the value or the price they have to pay that is different than if they were treated for a life-threatening condition. And that could be time, it could be pain, it could be everyday burden, it could be money. So perhaps that price is too high for certain patients to accept a treatment. For instance, if a treatment requires very close follow-up, a number of blood tests, some patients might not want that. And for others, it could be if they needed regular infusions at a hospital, that could require long travel. It could be time off from work. It could be even arranging a babysitter for a number of hours. So there are perhaps more issues at play in terms of dealing with chronic conditions than just getting them to the right physician at the right time in their disease journey. And that is what I call the non-patient journey.
And when you talk about that, Ulla, it makes me think it shouldn't all be on the physician to articulate all of these components in this non-patient journey that you describe and talk about the possible impacts there. Maybe it needs a more holistic approach with lots of different types of stakeholders. And I'm sure that is the case in some chronic diseases already, but it kind of opens a little bit of a Pandora's box as to, like, do we have to look at all of the stakeholders involved in the patient care here and try and work out what's happening along the whole non-patient journey as you talk about?
Exactly.
Yeah, because we do have to understand that every patient is different, and every patient have their history and their stakeholders that might mean something different for them. Or so I think it's important because it's family members that are also helping them to make this decision. Chronic patients do, of course, also consider on the long run the burden for their family members and the things that they might find difficult to do if they're walking down one treatment alley. And it's and it might be that some patients are thinking more about the future burden and not only the burden here and now.
Hey, I have a follow-up question to the demographic that was mentioned in the study, because it was a study of people with Parkinson's disease, and usually people with Parkinson's disease, they are part of the older part of the population.
I think it has a very big role to play, and I think it still plays into the current generation, perhaps to a smaller scale and perhaps more subtly, but it still has a role to play. I think, as Helle mentioned before, women's carer responsibility is really important, and also the role of the carer in making a treatment decision for or with the patient. And for instance, if you have a Parkinson's disease patient, so let's say usually men marry younger women, not always, but often there's a little bit of an age gap between a married couple or partners and the man being the older one. And I would love to see some data on this. I don't have it, but it's an observation. And if you are a female Parkinson's disease patient, you're usually already old. But then if you have a partner who is 5 years older than you, assuming this is a man, he might already suffer from a number of comorbidities and diseases related to age. And similarly, if you have a male Parkinson's disease patient, he might have a younger partner at home who has less age-related complications. So it might also be one of the reasons why it's easier for a man to take a decision on a particular treatment because he has a younger carer at home. That might definitely be a factor in this. Helle, do you have any?
No, I fully agree, Ulla. I think the resources that the partner represent would really be important here, especially if we are talking about device-aided therapy that might require some technicality and the practical things and skills that it might be a game changer if you have or you don't have the resource at home, or maybe you're even afraid of it, scared to take it in. So even though it's we have to understand that it usually is a mutual agreement in a household when you have these chronic diseases and you're standing in front of a decision making on a treatment that bring you on next level. This is often a mutual agreed decision.
I love that expression, a mutual agreement. And again, it points to the carer's role. Usually a partner, it could sometimes be children for this elderly patient population. And again, again, talking about women marrying older men, they might not have a partner anymore. They might have lost their partner for natural causes. So again, they might not have that partner at home to actually have their back. So a lot of things are at play here, and we can't, the data we found is just not granular enough to understand this. But that's why I think that we in the industry need to try and understand these things even more, especially the carer role and that mutual agreement going on at home when making a treatment decision.
I think they're great points, Ulla. And you've clearly started to shine a light on this potential problem that you've identified here in the study. What's the reaction been across the industry when you've talked about this or you've presented this work to other industry professionals? Are people largely supportive, or is there a lot of skepticism about the initial findings there?
They have been, I think, a little bit surprised at first, but then they usually tend to say, "Oh, but that is because so and so. That is because, as I said, men are, risk takers or tech savvy, and women are not, and that's just the way it is with this generation." So, but I've been trying to actually elevate it to a more systemic level, as we talked about. And one of the clinicians I work with on this study, she said that actually the symptoms between men and women with Parkinson's disease are a little bit different. So women actually have more of the symptoms where they would benefit from brain surgery. So perhaps more women should actually have been referred to the surgery than their actual share of the patient population. So that it's really made us talk a lot about access to treatments for men and women on a larger scale. And it also dives into the discussion currently ongoing. I don't know if you have followed these discussions about how women as patients on a large scale have tended to be ignored during development of medicines. And I think this perhaps is a little break in that whole discussion, I would say. And I think we as an industry need to understand this more, and especially for some of the older medicines on the market, they might not have been tested very well on women at all, or they might not have tried to understand the female experience of these treatments, and such as a thing like tech and devices. They might not have been developed with a female patient in mind at all. So I think, again, this is a little break in a larger discussion about women's access to healthcare on a very large scale.
Yeah, because when you talk about clinical studies, you typically see the only difference when they get pregnant. I mean, that is not the whole truth about the difference between men and women, but that is mainly what we look into. It's the possibility to get to be pregnant or during pregnancy. So that is to the extent we take it when we're talking clinical trials.
Yeah, so the prevailing thought has been that women are a minor version of a man in terms of clinical trials, and that is just not true. But at the same time, they've been excluded historically been excluded from clinical trials because of their presumed hormonal difficulties, or for a number of other reasons. So on one hand, they've been excluded from clinical trials. On the other side, the medicine developed has been assumed to work equally well for men and women. And more evidence points to that just not being right. And definitely is my hope that the new regulations and new clinical studies do account for men and women separately. And there are definitely some regulations in place there now. But again, we have a whole legacy of women not being included in these studies, and women's healthcare issues not being taken seriously. So there's a whole lot of work needing to be done. And just looking at how treatments then reach women, is just one little baby step to giving women the place they deserve and have a right to in the healthcare system.
I totally agree. It's a huge topic, and there's always the danger that you can boil the ocean with these types of things. So it's admirable that you're looking at an element that you could potentially have a real influence on initially, and then work wider from that. Hats off to you both.
Ivana, in the pre-call, you talked about highlighting something that cannot be read on our LinkedIn pages.
Ooh,
and
let's highlight that.
Well, I'd say both Helle and I are very invested in, we call it EED&I. It has several acronyms across industry, but equity, equality, diversity, and inclusion. And we both try and educate ourselves on this, and it means that also it's we see more now various injustices all around, and we try to understand unconscious biases that are the root of this, and we try to challenge our own biases on this. But that is an ongoing journey.
I think especially equity is on top of my mind when we're talking about this holistic approach, because it's to give the equality, you need to think equity. And this is exactly what I think is more important to bring in, to understand that the same information about something is maybe not sufficient. If you're thinking equity, you should really consider if this patient before you needs something else to make these decisions than just taking from a talking sheet where you have all the information that you have to check that you deliver. But so I think equity is really important here, to make sure that we give all patients a fair chance to make a decision on this.
And we need to give patients the information they need with where they are in life. And again, that is the complicated issue here. So even Ivana, if you mentioned that a certain tool would be useful and eliminate bias, it still doesn't eliminate the bias related to the communication that then takes place. It's just about back to what you mentioned about the holistic approach. And that, so I completely agree with Helle that equity is at the root of this, and we're still trying to understand how that is applied.
And we should dare to deliver different things to people. We should dare to do it, to differ between and to give individual information to patients. So it's also a question about daring to make the difference. It's just the thing about daring to do it, not to just deliver the same to everyone. Because of course you want to make sure that you're not forgetting everything and leaving things out. So there might be a thing around being brave and on one hand say you don't want to be biased, but on the other hand also be brave and see what you see and say what you think and then check up on that one. Risking that somebody might say that, oh, you're completely wrong, I'm not that kind of person. But still, I think take the risk and do it.
I agree.
We always ask our guests the same question at the end of the podcast. And that is, if you could wave a magic wand and change one thing in our industry, what would that be? And you can have different answers, Ulla and Helle.
I think if I had one chance to change something, I would really love us to focus much more about the behavioral analysis and to integrate that in everything we do. Make sure that we are getting all the information in that could help us understanding our patients better and helping, supporting the physicians and the healthcare professionals in general to make decisions that is the highest value.
And for me, the magic wand, I don't know, but I think industry has a role to play in healthcare, and I think industry should keep getting data that demonstrates certain pain points of the healthcare system and pushing for innovation and change that ultimately benefit patients. And I definitely think that we need data for men and women separately, and we need to understand their separate patient journeys based on the way that our society is in terms of men's and women's role.
Amen. That was great. So I think that we're just drawing to an end, Ulla and Helle. I'm sure our listeners are going to want to know where they can reach out to you to ask further questions on this fascinating topic. So where's it best for our listeners to get in touch? LinkedIn or email? Feel free to let us know.
I'm on LinkedIn.
Me too.
Yeah, Ulla Sofie Lønberg and Helle Hartnack.
So with that concludes the episode. Thanks very much indeed, and we look forward to potentially having you back on the show in the future to discuss this fascinating topic some more.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much. You're listening to Transformation in Trials. If you have suggestions for a guest for our show, write to hosts@transformationintrials.com. You can find more episodes in Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and the show notes are available at transformationintrials.buzzsprout.com. Thank you for listening.